The job posting didn't say much. Night auditor, regional billing reconciliation, 3 nights a week plus on-call, and a pay rate that was about 40% higher than anything else I'd seen that month. The listing was on a clearinghouse site for municipal and county contract work, the kind of place where you find tax lien processors and water district clerks, and most of the postings have been up so long they've gone gray and dead. This one was 4 days old. That was the first thing that caught me. Most of the good ones get scooped before I even refresh. I'd been out of steady work for going on 5 months by then. I'd done 11 years in collections and account reconciliation for a credit union before it got swallowed by a bigger one. And the bigger one already had people who did what I did. And they kept theirs and let go of ours. Severance lasted about as long as severance ever does. By February, I was 43 years old, behind 2 months on a truck payment, and rationing the good coffee because the cheap stuff gave me heartburn, and I couldn't justify both. My ex-wife and I had landed in a place that was civil but exact, and exact costs money. There's a number you have to hit every month or the texts start, and I was not hitting the number. So I called the contact line on the posting. It rang 4 times, and a man picked up who sounded like he'd been asleep at 2 in the afternoon. He didn't introduce himself or the company. He just said the name of the county, Harlow County, which I'd heard of but couldn't have placed on a map, and then waited like I was supposed to know what that meant. I told him I was calling about the billing reconciliation posting. He asked if I'd ever worked with utility billing systems. I said no, but 11 years of account work, ledgers, aging reports, the whole thing. He asked if I was bondable. I said I'd never had a problem. He asked if I could start that week. I said I could start the next day. There was a pause, and then he said something I thought about a lot later, though at the time it just sounded like the kind of thing a tired man says to fill silence. He said, "The work's easy. The hard part is not getting interested." I laughed because I thought it was a joke about boredom. He didn't laugh back. He gave me an address and a time, told me to bring 2 forms of ID and a voided check, and hung up before I could ask anything else. The address put me about an hour and 10 outside the city, off a state route that turned into a county road that turned into the kind of road where the center line gives up. Harlow County was old farm country that had mostly stopped farming. You'd pass a working operation, then 6 dead ones, barns sunk down at the knees, a grain elevator with the co-op's name faded to a ghost. The town the office was supposedly in was called Ashfield Station, and I drove through the whole thing in under a minute. A church, a closed diner, a post office that shared a building with the township hall, a gas station with 2 pumps, and a hand-lettered sign about the card reader being broken since Christmas. I figured the office had to be somewhere past it. It wasn't. The address was a low brick building set back behind the township hall, connected to it by a covered walkway, the kind of municipal annex that gets built in a good year and then never updated. 1 story, flat roof, narrow windows up high near the roof line, so you couldn't see in or out. A gravel lot with maybe 6 spaces, 3 of them with weeds coming up through them. There was a sign by the door, an old engraved plaque that said, "Harlow County Utility Services Billing and Accounts." Underneath, on a newer strip of plastic that had been screwed in over whatever used to be there, it said Regional Reconciliation Office. The man who'd answered the phone met me at the door. His name was Doyle. He was maybe 60, heavy-set in the way of a man who used to be strong, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a county-issue windbreaker zipped to the chin, even though it wasn't that cold inside. He shook my hand once, hard, and looked at me a second too long, like he was checking something off in his head, and then he said, "You came. Good. Half of them don't, after they see the drive. Inside, the place smelled like every government office I've ever been in. And then something underneath that. Old paper, the dry chemical smell of a copier that's been running too hot. Floor wax, and beneath all of it, a faint mineral smell, like the inside of a basement after rain, even though we were on the ground floor and it hadn't rained in a week. The lights were fluorescent, 2 tubes per fixture, and about a third of the fixtures had 1 tube out, so the hallway had a stuttered, uneven brightness. Bright, then dim, then bright. There was carpet that had been blue once. There were framed certificates on the wall from the state water quality compliance, that kind of thing, the most recent one. Dated 9 years back. Doyle walked me through it fast. The front area had 3 desks, only one of them used. Papers squared off on the others like nobody wanted to admit they were empty. Past that was a hallway with a break room, on one side a sink, a microwave with the door held shut by a strip of tape, a coffee maker, a county wall calendar still on the wrong month, and on the other side a row of doors. Most were locked. One was a supply closet. One was a bathroom. The hallway ended at a heavier door, gray steel with a keypad and a card reader, and a sign that said, "Records Authorized Entry." Doyle didn't take me through that one. He just nodded at it as we passed and said, "That's records. You won't need it. If you ever think you need it, you don't." The room where I'd be working was at the far end, past records, a windowless room with 2 long desks pushed together, 3 computers that looked about 15 years old, a dot matrix printer with the box feed paper still loaded, and the source of the heat in the building, an industrial-looking server cabinet against the back wall behind a chain-link partition with its own padlocked gate. The cabinet hummed. It had lights on the front, green mostly, a couple amber, that blinked in a pattern I'd come to know better than I wanted to. "That's the system," Doyle said, nodding at the cabinet. "It runs itself. You don't touch it. You don't open the cage. You don't unplug anything, even if the power's flickering, which it does. There's a generator. It handles it. Your job's out here." He sat me down at the middle computer and showed me the work. And I'll be honest, my first reaction was relief, because it was easy. Boringly, beautifully easy. The county ran utility billing for water, sewer, and a shared electric co-op across a handful of small townships. Every night, batch files came in from the meter systems and the payment processors, and the totals never matched, the way they never do, because of timing and rounding and return checks and people paying late and people paying twice. My job was reconciliation. I took the day's discrepancy report. I worked each line. I matched what could be matched, and I flagged what couldn't into one of 3 categories. Doyle had them written on an index card taped to the monitor. Category 1, timing differences, resolve and clear. Category 2, payment errors, route to corrections. Category 3, and this was the one he tapped twice with his finger, non-corresponding accounts. Those I was not to resolve. Those I was to log exactly as they appeared, into a separate ledger, and leave alone. "What's a non-corresponding account?" I asked. "An account that doesn't correspond," Doyle said, like that was an answer. Then he must have seen my face, because he softened it a little. "It's a billing entry that doesn't tie back to a current service record. Happens with old systems. The meter reads, the bill generates, but the account info's stale or missing. We don't fix those here. We just log them and pass them up. Somebody else handles the cleanup." I asked who. He said, "The county." And the way he said it closed the subject. The training took 2 nights. The first night, Doyle stayed the whole shift, sitting at the desk next to mine with a thermos and a paperback he never opened. watching me work through a backlog of a few hundred lines and correcting me when I miscategorized something. He was patient in a flat, worn-down way. He'd done this job, he told me, for 19 years. Before the regional consolidation, it had been a real billing office, with 8 people in daytime hours. And then the county merged the township's utilities, and most of the work went automated and went to nights, because the batch processing tied up the system, and one by one the people left and weren't replaced. And now it was him, and a woman named Priya, who worked the other 2 nights. And that was the whole night operation. He said the day side was just 2 clerks and a supervisor who came in to handle walk-ins and answer phones and never went near the reconciliation room. I asked why it was a night job at all, if it was just data work. He said the batches came in at night. I asked why the batches came in at night. He looked at me for a second and said, "You're already getting interested," and went back to his book. The rules came piecemeal, the way real rules at a real job do, not handed to you on a laminated card, but mentioned as they came up. And at first, they all sounded like the ordinary superstitions and workarounds of an old system that nobody fully understood anymore. Don't run the Category 3 log on the dot matrix. Use the screen because the printer stretches them, whatever that meant. Don't clear a Category 3 line, even if it looks like an obvious match, because they're not what they look like. If the discrepancy report comes in with more than 30 Category 3 lines on a single night, you stop, you don't work any of them, and you call Doyle's home number no matter the hour, if the system asks you to confirm something. And he was clear that the system would sometimes put a confirmation dialogue on the screen, a yes/no box. You read it twice, and you do not click yes unless you understand exactly what you're confirming. And if you don't understand it, you click no. No is always safe, he said. Yes is sometimes not. And the last one, which he told me at the end of the second night, standing in the doorway with his coat on, in the same voice you'd use to remind someone to lock up. The address is in Category 3. You'll see them. Some of them you might recognize, if you're local. Don't go look. Don't drive out to them. Whatever you log it and let it go. The ones that get curious are the ones that don't last here. And we need this job to last. You and me both, right? I said right. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. I was 43 and behind on a truck payment. And the man was telling me the job was stable if I didn't make trouble. And that was the only part I really heard. He left me his home number on a sticky note and a cell number for Priya, and told me my first solo shift was the next night, a Wednesday. He said it was usually quiet midweek. He said most nights the whole thing took 4 or 5 hours, and I could read or sleep through the rest as long as I was there to take any late batch and lock up at 6. He said the coffee in the break room was terrible and I should bring my own. Then he stopped at the steel door to records, put his hand flat on it for a second like he was feeling for a pulse, and left. That first solo night, I'll tell you, was fine. That's the part nobody believes when I tell it. That for a while it was just a job, and a good one. I brought my own coffee in a thermos and a sleeve of the cheap powdered creamer because I couldn't bring myself to buy the real thing yet. I parked in the gravel lot under a single sodium light that buzzed. I let myself in with the key and the code Doyle had given me. And the building did its building things. The copier in the front warming up on a timer for no reason I ever figured out. The lights stuttering, the server cabinet humming away behind its cage. I made my coffee and I sat down and I worked the discrepancy report. And there were 9 Category 3 lines that night. And I logged them exactly as they appeared and didn't think much about it. I did look at them, though. You can't not look at what you're typing. Each line had an account number, a service address, a meter ID, a billing amount, and a status field. The addresses were real addresses, rural routes, township roads, a few in the little towns. The amounts were ordinary, $40, $60, $110, the kind of utility bill anybody pays. The status field on a Category 3 line always said the same thing, NCA, which I assumed stood for non-corresponding account. I typed 9 of them into the separate ledger, which was its own little database program, ugly and old, just a form with fields. And when I hit save on each one, the program made a soft chime, a single note, the kind of sound that's supposed to tell you everything went fine. I finished by 2 in the morning. I read most of a book. I locked up at 6 and drove home into a gray dawn and slept until afternoon, and felt, for the first time in months, like a person with a job. The pattern held for the first couple of weeks. Wednesdays and the weekend nights were mine. Doyle had Mondays and one weekend night. Priya had the rest. And we overlapped only on the handover, a 15-minute window where the person leaving briefed the person coming on. I met Priya that way, a small, sharp woman in her 50s who'd been at it 11 years and had the manner of someone who'd long ago decided the less she said, the better. She gave me exactly the information I needed and not one word more. The first time we overlapped, she looked at my Category 3 log from the night before, scrolled through it fast, and said, 9, 12, 8. Good. Boring nights are good nights. You want boring. Then she sat down and I left, and that was that. The work settled into me. I got fast. I could clear the Category 1 timing stuff in my sleep. And the Category 2 corrections were just a matter of attaching a note and rooting the file. And the Category 3s I logged and let go, like I'd been told. I stopped looking too closely at the addresses. I started bringing the real creamer, then a small space heater for the front room because the heat all pooled in the server room and the rest of the building was cold. I caught up on the truck payment. I sent my ex the number on time 2 months running, and the texts stopped. I want to be clear about this because of what comes after. The job was saving me. I had every reason in the world not to get interested, and the man had told me twice not to. And for a while, I listened. The first thing that snagged me wasn't dramatic. It was a duplicate. I was working a Saturday batch, a heavier night, maybe 200 lines total. And I logged a Category 3 with an address out on Reller Road, $140-some, NCA. And something about the address sat funny, a little itch of familiarity. And I did the thing you're not supposed to do, which is I scrolled back through my own old logs, 3 weeks of them, just looking. And I found it. Same address on Reller Road. Same meter ID, a different night, 18 days earlier. A slightly different amount, 131, instead of 144. Logged by me, status NCA both times. Now, that by itself didn't mean anything alarming. An account that doesn't correspond would keep generating bills, right? It doesn't get fixed, so it keeps showing up. That actually made sense to me. The system reads the meter's live, the bill generates, the account info's stale. It lands in Category 3. I log it. Nobody upstream ever cleans it up. So next cycle it comes around again. The only odd part was the amount changing. Because if it were just a phantom recurring charge, you'd think it'd be the same number every time. The changing amount meant the meter was actually reading different usage, which meant something at that address was actually using water or power. Something at an address that, on paper, didn't correspond to any account, any customer, any person. I told myself the obvious thing. Tenants. Some rental where the account never got transferred. The landlord's name fell off the system in the consolidation. But people live there, and use water, and the bill just goes nowhere. That happens. That's a completely ordinary mess. I logged it and let it go, like I was supposed to. But I'd looked now. And once you've looked, you keep seeing. Over the next week or so, I started noticing the repeats without trying to. Reller Road came around again, of course, and so did others. There was a place on County Road 9 that showed up almost every batch with a small, steady amount, $30-something, NCA, like clockwork. There was one out on a road I didn't recognize, Varon Pass, that showed up irregular but always for a big number, 200, 250, the kind of bill you'd get for a serious operation, a farm with a lot of livestock or a shop running equipment. And there was the changing amount thing, which I kept seeing on the repeats, the numbers drifting up and down, cycle to cycle, like real usage, like there were real people in these non-corresponding houses, living real days, running the dishwasher, watering stock, turning on the lights. I want to say I stayed disciplined about it. But the truth is, I started keeping my own notes. Not in the system. On a legal pad I brought from home that I kept in my bag and took with me every night. Just addresses and amounts and dates, the repeats, because the account man in me couldn't stand a pattern I didn't understand. And the bored man in me had 11 hours a night to fill. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself I was just being thorough. I wasn't going to drive out to any of them. I'd heard that rule, and it was the one rule that scared me a little. The flat way Doyle had said the ones who get curious don't last. So I drew a line. I'll watch the numbers, but I won't go look. That was the deal I made with myself. I kept the first half of it. The second anomaly was the kind of thing that, if you've never worked old systems, you'd say was just a glitch, and you'd be right to, except that it happened at exactly the wrong moment to feel like a glitch. I was logging a Category 3 one night, a Wednesday, slow night, and the ledger program threw a confirmation box at me, which Doyle had warned me about, but which hadn't happened yet. A gray dialogue, the ugly old kind, with a line of text and a yes and a no. The text said, "Confirm service continuity for this account?" And below it, the address, which was the County Road 9 place, the steady $30 one. I sat there with the cursor between yes and no, and I remembered the rule. No is always safe. Yes is sometimes not. I clicked no. The box closed, the line logged like normal, the soft chime, done. I didn't think much of it. The system asked a weird question. I gave the safe answer. The world kept turning. But it asked again the next night. Same address. Confirm service continuity for this account? I clicked no. And the night after, the weekend, it asked a third time, and this time something was different. The box had a line of small text under the question I hadn't noticed before, or that hadn't been there before, and it said, "Prior response declined. Reconciler ID, Knight-3. I'm Knight-3. That's my login." The system was keeping count of how many times I'd said no, and it was showing me the count. And it was, in some way I couldn't name, asking me to reconsider. I clicked no again. 3. The box closed. The chime. But I sat there for a long time after, because something about being counted had gotten under my skin. A program that asks once is a glitch. A program that asks twice is a stubborn glitch. A program that asks 3 times and shows you the tally is doing something else, something that has a shape to it, an intention, even if the intention is just bad code from some contractor who left 20 years ago. I wrote it on my legal pad. County Road 9. Confirm service continuity. Declined ×3. At the handover that weekend, I tried to ask Priya about it. Carefully, the way you ask a coworker about something without admitting you've been paying too much attention. I said the system had thrown me a couple of confirmation boxes, and I'd clicked no like I was told. And was that normal? She didn't look up from her bag. She said, "You keep clicking no." Not a question. I said yes. She said, "Good. Some nights it'll push. It pushes more when it's behind." I asked what it meant for it to be behind. She zipped her bag and stood up and said, "Behind on what it wants," and walked past me to the desk. And that was the end of the conversation, except that at the door, with my hand on it, she said one more thing without turning around. She said, "Don't let it get to 40 boxes in a night. If it's pushing that hard, you call Doyle and you go sit in your car." And then she started working and I left. 40 boxes. Doyle had said 30 Category 3 lines was the call Doyle threshold. Now Priya had a 40-box threshold for the confirmations. These weren't superstitions. They were thresholds. The kind you put in a real procedure for a real failure mode. The kind somebody writes down after a bad night, because they don't ever want that bad night again. You don't set a number like that on a feeling. You set it because something happened at that number once. I drove home that morning turning it over, and for the first time, the job didn't feel like a lucky break. It felt like a seat somebody had carefully, deliberately, made safe enough to sit in. And the work of making it safe told you everything about what it would be like if it weren't. I should tell you about the smell, because it's part of how I started to come apart on the question, slowly, against my own better judgment. The mineral basement rain smell I'd noticed the first day got stronger on the heavy nights. The big batch nights, the nights with a lot of Category 3s, the building smelled wet, not damp. Wet like standing water, like the inside of a well house. And it came from the direction of the records room, the steel door at the middle of the hall. I'd walk past it to the break room, and the smell would be strongest right there. And a couple of times I put my hand on the steel door the way I'd seen Doyle do. And it was cold and faintly damp with condensation. Beaded up, even though the rest of the building was dry. Once I crouched and looked at the gap under the door, and I'd swear there was a darker line along the floor right at the threshold. A stain, like water had come up to that door from the inside and stopped. I didn't go in. I want that on the record. I never once went into records. But I started to understand the rule about it differently. If you ever think you need to go in, you don't. That's not a rule about security. That's a rule about temptation. You only write that rule for a door people want to open. The contradiction that really turned me was in the logs. And it took me a while to see it because I had to be looking across weeks to catch it. And most people in that chair weren't keeping a legal pad. I went back through my own Category 3 logs one slow night, all of them. And I sorted them in my head by address, the way you do when you've stared at numbers your whole career. And I noticed that some of the repeating addresses didn't just repeat. They graduated. An address would show up first as a small, steady amount, the $30 kind, NCA, for a couple of weeks. Then the amount would start to climb, cycle by cycle, 50, 80, 100. Then it'd plateau at a big number, the Verin Pass kind, 200 and up. And it'd hold there. And then this is the part that took me 3 reads to believe it would stop. The address would just drop off the report. No more bills. And a new address I'd never seen would appear that same week as a fresh, small, steady amount, the $30 kind, starting the climb over again. It was a cycle. Small, growing, big, gone, replaced. Like the system was filling something, account by account, address by address, raising each one until it was full, and then closing it out and opening the next. And the confirmation boxes, the confirmed service continuity ones, came thickest on the addresses that were in the middle of the climb, the growing ones, like the system wanted my yes most for the accounts it was in the process of filling, and was content to leave alone the ones it had already finished and the ones it hadn't started. I told myself 100 reasonable things. I told myself this was just how an old automated dunning system behaves, escalating charges on delinquent accounts until they get written off, then moving to the next. That's a real thing. That's ordinary collections. I'd done it for 11 years. But in ordinary collections, the accounts are people who exist, who you can call, who answer or don't. These accounts didn't correspond to anyone. NCA, no corresponding service record. And the meter reads kept changing, kept rising, which meant whatever was at these addresses kept using more, kept drawing more, right up until the moment the system decided it was full and closed it out and moved on. You don't write off an account that's using more every month. That's a paying customer, unless the rising number wasn't a bill. Unless the rising number was a measure of how much had been taken, and full meant something I didn't want to think about. I kept clicking no. I want you to know that. Every confirmation box, every confirm service continuity, I clicked no, because no was always safe. And because by then I'd half understood that yes meant I was agreeing to something. Agreeing that the service should continue, agreeing that the meter should keep reading, the bill should keep growing, the account should keep filling. No meant I declined to continue it. And every night the counts climbed in the little gray boxes, declined, declined, declined. And I started to feel irrationally like I was holding a line. Like as long as I kept saying no, nothing got worse on my watch. I didn't know what I was preventing. I just knew the man had said no was safe. And I clung to that the way you cling to the one instruction you actually understand. The night I almost broke it, I'd had a long week. I'd had to cover one of Priya's shifts because she'd called in, the only time that happened. And she'd called me directly instead of Doyle, her voice tight and quick on the phone. And she'd said she couldn't come in. And could I take it, and please just keep clicking no and lock up. And she'd explain later. She never explained later. I covered the shift, and it was a heavy one. A lot of category 3s. And the confirmation boxes came fast, faster than I'd ever seen. One after another, the same handful of climbing addresses over and over. Confirm service continuity. And I clicked no, 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 until my hand ached and the counts in the boxes were up in the 20s for some of them. And the building stank of standing water so strong, I'd propped the front door open for the air. And the lights were doing their stutter. And somewhere around 4 in the morning, bone tired, half asleep, I clicked yes. I didn't mean to. That's the truth, and it's also no excuse. The boxes were coming so fast, and my hand had a rhythm. And one of them came up a half second sooner than I expected, and my finger was already moving. And I clicked yes on an address, before my eyes had even read which one it was. The chime that played was different. Lower, longer. The box closed, and a new line wrote itself into the ledger without my typing it, and the status field on that line didn't say NCA. It said something I'd never seen. It said active. And the server cabinet behind the cage, which hummed the same flat hum every minute of every shift, changed pitch. It dropped, the way a pump drops when it engages a load. A deep mechanical settling that I felt in the floor through my shoes. And the amber lights on the front of it that usually blinked in a slow scatter all came on solid at once, a row of steady amber, and held. And the wet smell, which had been bad all night, rolled out of the records room hallway in a wave so thick I tasted it, cold and mineral and somehow organic under that, like a flooded cellar where something had been left. I sat very still. I looked at the line I'd written. The address on it was one of the climbing ones, a place out on a road called Sumner Cut that I'd been watching go up the ladder for 2 weeks. $40, then $70, then $120, and now active. And under the new line, the ledger threw one more box, and this one wasn't a yes/no. It was just a single button, okay, and the text above it said, "Service confirmed, reconciler AD, night-3, thank you." I didn't click it. I sat there with my hands flat on the desk, the way I used to wipe the same patch of counter when my hands needed something normal to do. Except now, my hands wouldn't even do that. They just lay there, and the server hummed its lower note, and the amber lights held, and the building smelled like a drowned field. And I thought about the rule. No is always safe. Yes is sometimes not. And I'd clicked yes. I should have called Doyle. That was the procedure, near as I understood it, and I'd promised myself I'd follow the procedure. But it was almost 5 in the morning, and I was ashamed. The specific stupid shame of an experienced man who's made a beginner's mistake out of tiredness. And I told myself I'd undo it, that there had to be a way to reverse a line, that I'd just fix it quietly and never tell anyone, and it would be like it never happened. So I did the other thing you're not supposed to do. I went into the logs to find the entry and reverse it. And to do that, I had to pull the full account history on the Sumner Cut address, the whole record, further back than my own logs went, back into the system's own files. And that's where I found the thing I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. The Sumner Cut address had a history that went back 11 years. 11 years of cycles. Small, growing, big, gone, over and over. The same address filling and emptying and filling again. And each cycle was tagged with the reconciler ID of whoever had been in this chair when it filled. And the IDs went night-1, night-2, night-3, the seats, not the people. So that told me nothing about who. But the system, being the kind of old system that hoards everything and throws nothing away, had kept a notes field on the account, free text, where reconcilers over the years had typed things. Most of it was procedural, dates and amounts, and the dry shorthand of the job. But scattered through it were notes that weren't procedural. Notes somebody had typed to themselves or to the next person, the way you do on a long night when there's no one to talk to. And one of them, dated about 14 months back, in the plain monospace of that ugly old program said this: "To whoever reads this, do not confirm continuity on Sumner Cut, no matter how many times it asks. It is not a vacant lot. I drove out. There are people there. They do not know they are accounts. Keep clicking no. I'm sorry I clicked yes once. I am paying it down a little every night, and it is almost clear. And when it clears, I am leaving, and I am not telling Doyle why. If the wet smell comes up strong, go sit in your car. D. Marsh, night 2. I read it 3 times. D. Marsh, night 2. Priya's seat. The same seat she'd called me from in that tight, quick voice, telling me to keep clicking no and lock up. And she'd explain later, and then never coming back. And the note said, "Do not confirm continuity on Sumner Cut." The exact address I'd just clicked yes on. The address that now said, active. The address with the steady amber lights, and the lower hum and the smell rolling out of the records room. And the note said, there are people there. They do not know that they are accounts. The cursor blinked under the note, waiting. The OK box was still open in the corner of the screen. Service confirmed, thank you. And the server hummed its new low note, and somewhere out on the road called Sumner Cut, in a house that on paper did not correspond to anyone. The bill I'd just confirmed was, right now, beginning to grow. I didn't click the OK box. I want to start there, because in my head that mattered for a long time. The way a man holds on to the one small thing he did right when the rest of the night went wrong. I left the box open. I told myself that as long as I didn't click OK, the thing wasn't finished. The confirmation wasn't complete. And that was the kind of reasoning that lets you keep sitting in a chair when everything in your body wants to get up and drive home and never come back. The first thing I did, once my hands would work again, was try to reverse the line. I'd done corrections for 11 years. Every system that lets you make an entry lets you void it. Somewhere, even the old ones, even the ugly ones, there's always a reversal, a credit, a contra entry. Because accounting doesn't work without the ability to admit a mistake. So I went looking for it. I pulled up the Sumner cut line, the new one, the active one. And I looked for the void function, and it wasn't grayed out, which was almost worse. It was right there. Void entry. I clicked it. The system asked me a question. Of course it did. A gray box, the same ugly font. And it said, voiding an active service requires transfer of balance. Select transfer account. And below it was a drop-down. And when I opened the drop-down, it was a list of addresses. Dozens of them. Every Category 3 address I'd ever logged, and a lot I hadn't. All of them sitting there waiting to receive the balance I wanted to get rid of. I understood it immediately, in my gut, before my head caught up. You couldn't make the balance disappear. You could only move it to another house. Voiding the Sumner Cut account meant choosing which other address would start its climb in Sumner Cut's place. The system would let me undo what I'd done, gladly, the second I agreed to do it to someone else. I closed the drop-down. I didn't void it. I sat there, and I thought, in a flat, practical way, like I was working a problem at the old job. There is no neutral move here. The thing the man told me no is always safe. I finally understood it all the way down. No was safe because no didn't move anything. No just declined. The danger was never in saying no. The danger was in every action that did something, because every action that did something did it to a person. It was almost 6. I had to lock up. I left the OK box open on the screen, which I now think was a mistake, because leaving it open meant the entry stayed in limbo, half confirmed. And I've come to believe the half-confirmed state is the hungry one. But I didn't know that yet. I shut the monitor off, which doesn't shut off the system, just the picture, and I locked the reconciliation room and walked down the hall past the record store, and the wet smell was so heavy by then that I breathed through my mouth, and I'd swear the dark line under the door had spread, come out maybe an inch onto the blue carpet, a wet darkening you could see the nap of the carpet through, and I did not crouch down to look closer. I locked the front door and stood in the gravel lot in the gray light, and I called Doyle. He answered on the second ring, which told me he'd been awake, which told me something too. I said his name and there was a silence, and he said, "What did it do?" Not what happened. What did it do? Like it was understood between us, like it always had been. I told him. I told him about the rhythm of the boxes and the tiredness and the accidental yes and the active line and the server changing pitch. And I did not tell him I'd read the account history. And I did not tell him about D. Marsh's note, because some part of me had already decided that note was mine, that it was a message to the chair, and I was in the chair, and Doyle had his own seat. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet long enough that I checked the phone to see if the call had dropped. Then he said, "Did you click OK on the confirmation?" I said no. I said I'd left it open. "Good," he said, and he breathed out, and I heard him sit down somewhere, the creak of an old chair. Leaving it open's bad, but clicking OK is worse. As long as it's open, it's pending. Pending can be managed. He said it like a man reading from a procedure he'd recited to himself many times. "Here's what you're going to do. You're going to go home and sleep. You're not going back in until your next regular shift. You do not go out to that address. You hear me? You do not drive out to Sumner Cut. Whatever you're thinking right now about checking on it, about seeing if it's real, you don't. That's the one that gets people. I asked him what it was. I think I'd earned the right to ask by then. And I asked it plain. What is it, Doyle? What's in the records room? What happens to the addresses? And he gave me an answer that wasn't an answer, except that the way he gave it told me he half believed it and half didn't, which is the most honest anybody at that place ever was with me. He said, "You ever work a system that was older than the people running it, where nobody who built it is still around, and the manual's gone, and you just keep it fed because the one time somebody tried to shut it off, it got worse?" He let that sit. Then he said, "I don't know what it is. I've been here 19 years, and I don't know what it is. I know it bills. I know the bills have to go somewhere, or it finds somewhere to put them. I know the houses it bills aren't supposed to be there, and then they are. And I know the people in this chair who tried to be heroes about it aren't around to tell you it was worth it. That's what I know. That's the whole 19 years. I asked about Priya. I asked it carefully. I said, 'Is Priya okay? She called in and never came back.' And Doyle was quiet again, longer this time, and then he said, 'Priya paid hers down. That's all I'll say. She got herself clear and she got out and good for her. And you don't call her, and you don't ask after her, because the way you stay out is you stay out quiet.' And then he said the thing that I keep coming back to. The thing that should have made me quit that morning and instead made me go to sleep and come back. He said, 'You're not in trouble yet. One pending entry, that's recoverable. People recover from one. Just don't make it two.' I went home. I slept 4 hours and woke up at noon with my heart going and the taste of that wet smell still somehow in the back of my throat. And I lay there, and I did the arithmetic that I'd been doing my whole adult life. The arithmetic of, can I afford to walk away from this? And the answer was the same as it had always been, which was no. I'd caught up on the truck. I'd gotten the texts to stop. I had, for the first time in a year, a small cushion in the account. And the cushion was the job. And there was no other job, not at this rate. Not within an hour and 10 of where I lived. Not for a 43-year-old whose entire resume was at a credit union that no longer existed. I told myself Doyle had said it was recoverable. I told myself I'd just go in and click no forever and pay down the pending balance, the slow, safe way like D. Marsh had, like Priya had, and get clear and get out. I made it a plan. Plans are how you talk yourself into things, but I couldn't leave the Sumner Cut thing alone. And here's where I have to be honest about myself. Because the prompt of my own conscience won't let me pretty it up. It wasn't bravery that made me drive out there. It wasn't that I wanted to save anybody. It was that I needed to know whether Dee Marsh had been telling the truth or whether she'd been a tired person who'd cracked. Because if she'd cracked, then I hadn't done anything real. The yes was just a data entry, and I could sleep. I drove out to Sumner Cut to make myself feel better. That's the actual reason. I want that on the record before I tell you what was there. Sumner Cut was a gravel road off a county road off the state route. The kind of road that doesn't appear to go anywhere, running between two fields gone to scrub. It was late afternoon, full daylight, which I'd chosen on purpose, because whatever I am, I'm not the kind of fool who drives to the haunted address at night. I went slow, watching the mailboxes, and most of the lots were empty or had the concrete pads and lilac bushes that mean a house used to be there and got torn down. And then, about a mile and a half in, there was a house. It was an ordinary house. That's the part I can't make sound frightening, and that frightened me most. A small 2-story farmhouse, white. A little run down but lived in. A porch with a chair on it. A truck in the drive, an older model. Clean. There were curtains in the windows. There was a garden bed along the front with something growing in it. Tomatoes maybe, staked up. There was a dog on a chain by the barn that stood up when my truck slowed and watched me but didn't bark. There was a number on the mailbox, and the number matched the number on my legal pad. The number I'd logged a dozen times as NCA. Non-corresponding. No service record, no customer, no person. There were people in that house. I saw a woman pass a downstairs window, carrying something. A basket, maybe. The ordinary movement of a person doing an ordinary chore in their own home in the late afternoon. I didn't stop. I didn't get out. I drove past at 5 miles an hour with my heart slamming, and I looked at that house, and that woman, and that dog, and that staked-up garden. And every single one of those things was real, was solid, was using water and power, was a life, and not one of them existed in any record the county kept. They did not correspond. The system knew they were there, the meter read them. The bill grew, but the world they lived in didn't have a slot for them. And so the system filed them under NCA and waited, every cycle, for somebody in my chair to confirm that their service should continue, to confirm that they should keep being billed, to confirm that the meter should keep reading them, and then to close them out when they were full. I drove home, and I threw up on the shoulder of the state route, and I sat in the truck for a long time. And then I did the thing I'm least proud of in the whole account. I went into my next shift, and I clicked no on Sumner Cut. Every box, no, no, no. And I watched the declined count climb, and I told myself I was protecting them. But I wasn't protecting them. I was protecting me. Because by then, I understood that the pending entry I'd left open was sitting on Sumner Cut like a held breath. And every no I clicked wasn't pushing the account down. It couldn't. The entry was already active, already confirmed. Once every no I clicked was just declining to confirm it again, declining to advance it, holding it at the line. I was keeping the breath held. And I knew, the way you know a thing you don't want to know, that a held breath has to come out eventually. And that when it did, it wasn't going to come out on me. It was going to come out on that house. I should tell you about the maintenance reports, because that's the next thing that made the floor drop. And it came from being nosy in exactly the way the job rewards you for not being. I'd started, after Sumner Cut, going in early and staying late, telling myself I was being diligent. And one of those long edges of shift, I went through the gray steel filing cabinets in the front room. The ones nobody used. The ones full of the paper version of everything from before the consolidation. And in the bottom drawer of the last cabinet, there was a folder of maintenance reports for the building, going back decades. The boring kind, HVAC service, roof patches, the generator. And the generator reports were where it got bad. The generator, the one Doyle said handled the power flickers, the one that kept the server running, had a service log. And the service log had a line on it that recurred, a scheduled task, every quarter, performed by a contractor whose name was blacked out, actually blacked out, with a marker, on a maintenance report, which is not a thing anybody does on a maintenance report. And the recurring task was described in the dry language of facilities work as purge and refill records chamber coolant loop. Confirm level against active count. Confirm level against active count. The records room wasn't a records room, or it wasn't only one. It had a chamber in it, a loop, something that held a level, something that was purged and refilled on a schedule. And the level was checked against the active count, the number of active accounts. The houses. The level rose and fell with the houses. And every quarter, somebody whose name had been blacked out came in and purged it and refilled it and checked it against the count. And the wet smell on the heavy nights was that loop, that level, whatever filled it, pressing up against the steel door, coming up an inch onto the blue carpet when the active count climbed. I didn't open the records room. I want to keep saying that because it's the only line I never crossed, and it's the only reason I'm able to tell you this. But I understood the rule about it now. Completely, the way you understand a warning sign after you've seen the drop it's standing next to. If you ever think you need to go in, you don't. Because the only reason you'd think you needed to go in was to see the level. And nobody who'd seen the level had stayed the kind of person who could do this job. The next handover was with Doyle. And I almost didn't go. And then I did. Because not going would have looked like something. And at that point, looking normal was the whole game. He was at the desk when I came in, working, and he didn't look up. And the room smelled like hot dust and old plastic and the coffee he'd reheated too many times in the taped-shut microwave. I sat down to take the handover, and he slid the log across to me, the shift log, the physical one. A county issue ledger book that we both signed every night with the cheap county pens that never quite worked. And I went to sign, and I saw the entries above mine. And one of them, 3 nights back, in Doyle's blocky handwriting, said, active count +1, pending unresolved, night -3 notified, monitoring. He'd logged it. He'd logged my mistake, 3 nights back, in the official shift log, in his own hand, the night I called him. Active count +1. He'd written down that the count had gone up by 1 because of me, and that the pending was unresolved, and that he was monitoring. He'd created a record. And I understood, sitting there with the dead county pen in my hand, that the record was the leash. As long as that line existed, in his handwriting, in the official book, I was the one who'd raised the active count, documented and dated. And if anything ever came of it, if anybody upstream, the county, whoever the county was, ever looked, it would be my ID on the active line, and Doyle's calm professional notation that he'd notified me and monitored me, the good supervisor, covering the building by hanging it on the new guy. I didn't say anything about it. That's the thing about being the new guy with a record against you. You learn fast that the way you survive is you don't make the record longer. I signed under his entry. I took the handover. He told me it had been a quiet few nights. The count was holding. The pending on Sumner cut was stable as long as I kept declining. And then he put his coat on and stopped at the record's door and did the thing he did. The flat hand against the steel, feeling for the pulse. And this time, I understood he wasn't being eerie. He was checking the temperature of the door. He was checking the level, the only way you can check it from outside. And then he left, and I was alone with it. It was a bad night. The boxes came hard, harder than the night I'd slipped. And they were almost all Sumner cut, over and over. Confirm service continuity. Prior response declined. And the count in the corner of the box climbing into the 30s, the 40s, past 40, past Priya's threshold, the threshold where you're supposed to call Doyle and go sit in your car. And I didn't call Doyle, and I didn't go sit in my car, because I'd figured something out by then that I couldn't unfigure, which was that the boxes weren't a threat to me. They were a negotiation. The system wasn't trying to scare me into clicking yes. It was trying to wear me into it, the way water wears stone, because the pending entry on Sumner cut was a held breath. And it wanted me to let it out. It wanted the confirmation completed. The OK clicked. The account advanced toward full. And every box was just the same patient ask. Will you let it continue? Will you let it continue? Will you let it continue? And here's where someone else paid, and I have to tell it straight because softening it would be the worst kind of lie. Around 3 in the morning, with the count past 50 and the wet smell so thick I'd propped the front door open into the cold for the air, the phone rang. The office landline. An old multi-line phone on the front desk that I'd never once heard ring on a night shift, because nobody calls a reconciliation office at 3 in the morning. I let it ring 4 times, and then I picked it up because not picking it up felt worse. And it was a woman, and she was scared, and she said she was sorry to call so late, but the number was on her bill, the only number on her bill, and she didn't know who else to call. And her water had started running brown. And then it had started running warm, hot even, out of the cold tap. And the lights were doing something. And there was a smell like a flooded cellar, coming up through the floor. And her husband had gone down to the basement 20 minutes ago to look at the well, and he hadn't come back up. And he wasn't answering when she called down the stairs. I asked her, and I already knew. I asked her what her address was. She told me. Sumner Cut. The number on my legal pad. The white farmhouse with the staked up tomatoes and the dog on the chain. I want to tell you I did something. I want to tell you I told her to get out of the house. Get in the truck, drive, don't go in the basement, take the dog and go, just go, anywhere, away from that address. And maybe if I'd said that, fast and hard the second she said the road name, maybe it would have done something. But I didn't say that. What I did in the first 3 seconds, the seconds that mattered, was think about the shift log. I thought about active count +1, night -3, in Doyle's blocky hand. I thought about the fact that this call, this woman, was happening because of an entry with my ID on it. And that if I told her the truth, if I said, "Ma'am, your house is non-corresponding. Your house is an account. The system is billing you, and the bill is almost full. And I am the one who confirmed it. I would be confessing, on a recorded line maybe, to a thing I didn't understand and couldn't prove, and that would end with me holding all of it alone. I thought about myself for 3 seconds. With that woman on the phone and her husband not answering from the basement, I thought about myself. And then I told her I'd send someone. I told her the duty crew would come out. I'd dispatch them right now. Sit tight. And I hung up. And there is no duty crew. There was never a duty crew. I knew there was no duty crew when I said it. I said it because it was the thing that would get me off the phone. I said it so she'd stop talking to me, so the call would end, so I wouldn't have to keep being the man on the other end of it. And then I sat there, and the boxes stopped. All at once, the whole storm of confirmed service continuity boxes that had been hammering me for hours, they stopped. The screen went quiet, and the pending entry on Sumner Cut, I watched it happen. I watched the status field, the pending, resolved itself. The OK box I'd left open for days. Service confirmed, thank you. It closed on its own. The entry completed itself without me, and the status went from active to a thing I'd seen in the histories at the end of every cycle. A thing I'd watched a dozen addresses turn into right before they dropped off the report and got replaced. It went to closed. Paid in full. The server cabinet behind the cage changed pitch, came back up out of its low, load-bearing note to the ordinary flat hum, and the row of steady amber lights went dark one by one. And the wet smell pulled back, retreated down the hall toward the records door like a tide going out. And the building was just a building again, cold, fluorescent lit, smelling of toner and floor wax and old coffee. The count in the corner of the screen, the active count, the number Doyle checked against the door, dropped by 1. Paid in full, that's what it called it. The bill had grown until the account was full, and then it had collected. And the collection was a man going down his own basement stairs to look at his own well and not coming back up. And a woman on a phone calling the only number on her bill. and an address dropping off a report, paid in full. And I'd done the last part, not the yes. The yes was an accident weeks back. The last part, the part where she called for help, and I gave her a lie that kept her in the house and got me off the phone. And in the quiet, after I hung up, the system finished what the accidental yes had started, and it finished it clean, and it thanked nobody, because the thank you box had already closed. I didn't go out there. I want to be clear about the shape of my cowardice, so you don't give me credit I didn't earn. I didn't drive to Sumner Cut to see. I didn't call anybody. I didn't call the real sheriff, the county, anybody, because what would I have said? And because some animal part of me knew that the next thing on the report would be a fresh, small, steady account, a new address starting its climb, and that as long as I didn't look, I could keep not knowing for certain whose. I sat in that office until 6, and I did the rest of the batch with my hands shaking. And I logged the category 3s, and I locked up. And I drove home in the gray light, and I did not throw up this time, which I think is worse, that I had it in me by then to not throw up. When I came in for the next handover, Doyle was there, and he already knew. He had the shift log open, and he'd read my entries, and he'd read between them. And he looked at me for a long time, longer than the first day. And what was in his face wasn't horror, and it wasn't accusation. It was recognition. It was a man looking at another man who'd just crossed the same line he'd crossed however many years back, and finding out he had company. He said, "The count dropped." Not a question. I said yes. He said, "Sumner Cut closed." I said yes. He nodded slowly, and he closed the logbook, and he said, "Then your pending's clear. You're recovered. It's done." And he said it gently, like that was supposed to be a comfort, like the thing I should take away was that my balance was 0 now, my entry resolved, my record clean, that I'd gotten myself out the way Priya had, the way he had, by letting it pay itself down on somebody who wasn't me. I asked him, and my voice did something I wasn't proud of. It cracked. I was so tired. I asked him how he lived with it. 19 years. How? And he didn't give me a speech. He just said, "There's a man down a well out on Sumner Cut who's there because the meter read his house, and somebody had to be in this chair when it filled. If it wasn't you, it was the next guy. And the house was always going to fill. That's not me telling you it's okay. That's me telling you the house was always going to fill." He picked up his coat. "You didn't make the system. You just couldn't afford to quit it. Same as me, same as her." He stopped at the records door and put his hand on the steel, and it was cool now, the level down, the tide out, and he said, almost to himself, "It's quiet for a while after one closes. Use the quiet. Pay down anything pending. Keep clicking no." And he left. I stayed. That's the part I have to make you sit with, because every version of this story where the man quits and goes to the paper and brings the whole thing down is a version that didn't happen. And I owe you the one that did. I stayed. I had a truck payment and a number to hit every month, and an ex who would notice the day I missed it. And I had a clean record now, balance 0. And I had Doyle's word that it stays quiet for a while after one closes. And I had the thing nobody warns you about, which is that the second time the boxes come, you already know how to make them stop. And knowing how is its own kind of trap, because the not knowing was the only thing that had ever made me hesitate. I worked there another 7 months. I got good at the quiet kind of survival the others had. I clicked no, mostly. I kept my legal pad. I watched the new account that came up the week Sumner Cut closed a small, steady $30 address out on a road called Hadwin Spur, NCA, starting its climb, and I did not drive out to see whose house it was. And I have to live with the fact that not knowing was a choice I made on purpose, every single night, 50-some nights. Because knowing would have obligated me and not knowing let me sleep. I told myself I was holding the line. I was holding the line the way you hold a door shut against water. You're not stopping the water. You're just choosing not to be the one it lands on, and choosing it over and over, and calling the choosing diligence. I left in the fall, not heroically. I left because the day clerk mentioned, in passing, awkward, the way people mention things they don't understand, that the supervisor had had me reclassified, that there was paperwork from the county, and my contractor status had been changed to something permanent, salaried, with a title, Night Operations Reconciliation Lead, and a small raise, and that Doyle was being moved to days. They were moving Doyle to days, 19 years, and they were finally letting him off the night chair. And the way you let a man off the night chair is you find somebody to put in it, somebody who's recovered, somebody with a clean balance and a record in the logbook, and a reason to stay quiet, somebody the system has already taught how to make the boxes stop. They were giving me his seat. They were making me night 3 permanently, not the contractor filling night 3, but the man, the lead, the one who trains the next contractor and tells him the work's easy, the hard part is not getting interested, and writes active count +1, new hire notified, monitoring, in the logbook in his own blocky hand when the new guy slips. That's what the promotion was. That's what it always was. Doyle hadn't been my supervisor. He'd been my predecessor, holding the seat warm, paying down his own balance the long way over 19 years until somebody walked in off a clearinghouse posting who was broke enough to take the chair and decent enough to feel bad about it. Because the system needs both. It needs you broke, so you can't leave, and decent, so the no means something. So that the day you finally click yes, it costs you, because a cost is what keeps you quiet. So I quit. I'd like to tell you I quit out of principle, that I saw the seat they were sliding under me and stood up and walked out clean. But the truth has the same shape it's always had. I quit because being a contractor who slipped once is recoverable. Doyle said so, balance 0. And being the lead, the permanent one, the one who trains the next one and signs the log, that's not a balance you ever get to 0. That's the chair where the balance is the rest of your life. I quit to save myself, the same reason I did everything else. I quit before they could make me the thing that stays. I gave no notice. I left the legal pad in a dumpster behind a gas station 2 counties over, which I know proves nothing. Which I know means that if I tried to tell anyone this, there's no record, no pad, no proof. Just a man who worked a billing job for a while and left. And a county office that the day clerk said was hiring again, posting up fresh on the clearinghouse site, 4 days old, 40% over market, the kind of posting that gets scooped before you even refresh. Except this one doesn't. This one stays up just long enough for the right person to find it when they're behind on something they can't be behind on. I still drive past the turnoff sometimes. I don't mean to. It's just on the way to a place I have to go. And the office is still there behind the township hall, the narrow windows up near the roofline. And some nights, there's one car in the gravel lot under the sodium light. And I think about the man or the woman in that chair right now, working the discrepancy report, logging the category 3s, clicking no, 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 holding the line, not knowing yet about the cycle, the climb, the held breath, the level behind the steel door that rises and falls with the count. Not knowing yet that there's a house out on Hadwin Spur, or wherever it's reached by now, with curtains in the windows and a garden out front and people in it living an ordinary day, people who don't correspond, people who are an account, and that the bill is growing, And that one tired night, when the boxes come too fast, their finger is going to move a half second before their eyes, the way mine did. And then they'll know what I know. And here's the last thing. The thing I check and wish I didn't. I kept the bank account the county paid into, the same one I gave them the voided check for that first day, because it was easier than closing it, and I never got around to it. And 2 weeks ago, a deposit hit it. Small, $30-some, from Harlow County Utility Services. No invoice, no explanation, just a line on my statement. A payment to me, dated, time-stamped, from an office I quit 7 months ago that owes me nothing. I called the bank, and they said it was a valid ACH from a valid originator, and there was nothing irregular about it. I called the day office at the county and got a voicemail that just said the office number and a beep. I didn't leave a message. A $30 payment, a small, steady amount, the kind that starts the climb. I haven't touched it. I've left it sitting there, the way I left the OK box open all those months ago, because I have the same feeling about it that I had then, that as long as I don't act on it, it stays pending. It stays just a number. It doesn't advance. But I know better now than I did then. I know a held breath comes out. I know the level rises whether you look at it or not. And every month, on the same day, give or take, another $30-some hits the account. A little more each time. Last month it was 41. This month, 48. And somewhere in a system older than the people running it, in a chair I used to sit in, an address is climbing, and the address is mine.